Thanks,
On
Arvind.
Smarchitect Shortcast, I have the pleasure to welcome Dr. MuckAI Girish, CEO of Rockfish Data, a company that is at the forefront of solving the most critical challenge facing modern enterprises, unlocking the value in operational data through synthetic data generation. Girish, thank you for joining us today. I'm extremely excited to have you on my show.
Arvind, it's a pleasure to be here and very privileged to be speaking with you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. So maybe for my listeners, you can give a 30-second to a minute background of who you are, what you do, other than whatever I have already introduced you with.
Absolutely, Arvind. Just been fortunate, being in the tech industry, as you said, more than 30 years. Spent a lot of my time in the early part of when the internet was getting built, especially the infrastructure, part of telecom and cable infrastructure at that time. And then moved to the dark side of AI about a little over more than 10 years ago. It's been an exciting journey. And also part of my other time I spent in my life is in nonprofits as a volunteer. So I've been involved in 3 nonprofits over the last 22, 23 years. Fortunate to have the opportunity to serve on both the corporate side as well as on the nonprofit side.
That is fantastic. Kudos to you on your nonprofit initiatives, and really appreciate it. All right. So coming to synthetic data. So I want to start off with a clear vocabulary from your background and history. What is synthetic data and why now? What is the hype versus reality of synthetic data in this age?
Yeah, Arvind, data has become for AI and for any business outcome and process today. Right. We are seeing AI literally permeate every single aspect of our lives. AI works based on data. So data has become the fuel or the power or the oil that powers it, right? Essentially. So it is really, really critical that having the right fuel or the right data is important for AI to work today. And why synthetic data? Even though we do collect a lot of data today, we means businesses.
Organizations,
Organizations, right? Enterprises.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not enough. That only tells you a small set of story that you need. That you have. What we are really interested, most of the decisions are all about future, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? And you don't have data on that, right? And that's where the need for synthetic data comes in, where you need to create data that you don't have that becomes what you really could be or what the data could be so that you can make the right decisions and run these models and train them and all of that in a sense, right? In other words, synthetic data is data that looks and feels like original data, but it also varies. One is privacy aspects, right? Sometimes you want to share data with somebody and it's very sensitive. So you want to make sure that it's privacy safe. Second, to create these scenarios, you do want the data to have a lot of bearing on what the historical data is. So you can always create random data sets, but that doesn't really do any good for us. So that's where synthetic data comes in. And why now? AI is everywhere. Agentic AI models, AI systems, and without proper data, nothing really works that well. So
it is a fascinating space, right? So in my early days of doing agents, one thing I figured out is that there is never a situation where we've had just enough data. There is always an outlier. There is always something we didn't think about, and it breaks. Even today, it always breaks. And I think part of the reason is, look, there are multiple reasons why you don't have enough data. One is obviously the access to the data, right? So many systems of records are out there. You can only do so much. And then the second piece is data quality and some of the bad data that you feed into, the agents themselves. And then the third is obviously you can only think about a certain set of scenarios. In some ways, we humans do not have access to the entire world. So I think this is a perfect time, especially as you said, AI being omnipotent and it's everywhere. Synthetic data kind of comes to life because it feeds AI what it needs rather than what it wants, if you will, right? Well done. Now, I've also, heard from a lot of the industry trends. So Gartners and the Forresters, they have consistently said late last year that, in 2026, synthetic data is an area to watch out for. When you talk to enterprises, do you think synthetic data is in the part of their enterprise data and AI strategy?
Yeah, Arvind, absolutely. Right. Data strategy has become right front and center for every enterprise. Even the Snowflake CEO, Sridhar Ramaswamy, says many times, right? There is no AI strategy without a data strategy, right? And if you don't have a data strategy, your AI strategy is not going to do as good as what you would want it to do. So having said that, there was a time in which synthetic data was an alien concept for people. If you look at, BC, before ChatGPT, it just
Nice.
wasn't,
There is a term now called BC. Wow. All right. Okay, that's news to me. Excellent.
At AD is after DeepSeek.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So I think BC, if you look at it and today, I think synthetic data was not that, people always, they knew about it. They had not really put that as part of their main focus in their data strategy. But today, people are realizing that I got to have all the data that I need in order to make my AI agents or my AI models or any business decisions to work well. So they are looking at it for sure. How they do it, it differs from place to place and industry to industry and all that. And you mentioned, Gartner and Forrester and other analysts, right? For them, this has been a pretty big deal, actually. Gartner, for example, has in their hype cycle for AI, Gen AI, synthetic data figures prominently. It's actually approaching the trough of disillusionment, right? So that means it's going to take off subsequently. So if you looked at their hype cycle about 4 years ago, it was in the initial part of the hype cycle, right? So that it has kind of gone through that phase. Gartner also talks a lot about hyper synthetic data. Again, depending on the industry, if you look at healthcare and financial services, you're looking at transactions, healthcare data, and so on, different type of data sets. Whereas if you look at telecom, Internet of Things, a lot of these devices that produce engineering systems that produce tons and tons of data, there is a level of A, there is time series. These data varies over time. And then B, the quantity and frequency of data collection is just incredibly intense, right? So hypersynthetic data plays a big role, or at least is going to play a big role, according to Gartner, for example, for companies. And in order to, generate this, obviously, it's not trivial, right? In order to do this, and we can talk more about it, but I think it has become, people have started to realize, initially said, hey, let's roll out LLMs, right? So everybody did it. And then let's roll out, let's start rolling out agentic AI systems. People started doing it, and they're obviously in the middle of that. But then when you start seeing, are these systems producing the right value for me? Are they accurate enough? Are they reliable? Are they consistent? That's when you realize, oh, my data is not enough, right? I need more.
It is very, very interesting. See, I use this word context and content, right? So like you said, depending on the context, let's say if it's a patient-related data and you're talking about healthcare, right? Your content changes. But with that content, the parameters of the content, so the bias, the fidelity factors, the privacy factors, all of those has to be tweaked as well. Because if you look at some of the levers, you can typically tweak in a, say, for example, standard enterprise data set. You can tweak cost, time, availability, some of those the 5Ds or whatever they call it, right? You can tweak some of the levers, but as AI requires specific types of data to train the models, how do you kind of go about, kind of understanding the context and the content? Because everywhere I go, context seems to be picking up rapidly now, more than ever, with the hallucinations and everything going on with the agent. So help me understand how synthetic helps in context.
Absolutely, Arvind. I think you hit the nail there, right? So, take an example of a company that does a product that does anomaly detection. So, you have if you look at telecom operators, or if you look at any large company, they run these ERP systems that are, handling all their purchases, people that are buying stuff through them, right? Extremely critical applications. They can't afford to have these applications go down because, billions of dollars transact through that on a daily basis, right? But there is a team, IT ops team, they sometimes call themselves AI ops team. They manage this, and their job is to make sure these applications run all the time. Just adding capacity is not enough, right? You can always go in and say, I need more servers, more this, more that. Unfortunately, it solves certain problems, of course. But when there is an internal issue, there's a root cause that is causing an issue. Just because you have 10 times more servers, you're not going to do. It's not going to solve your problem, right? Unfortunately, to train these models and make the AI model that really produces the right classification there is hard. You need labeled data, which means you need to know when there's an anomaly, when it's not an anomaly, right? Your telemetry data doesn't come and say anomaly, no anomaly, right? It's not labeled. Correct. So manual labeling, as you know, is very hard, expensive, and
labor intensive.
Very tough. And sometimes it's not even possible because you don't even have a knowledge that, hey, this, there was an incident that happened half an hour later, and this was actually a root cause that may have caused it, right? So labeling is one. Number two, for them also to look at various types of anomalies that could happen. You can have, zillion combinations and permutations of this. So in order to make that happen, the data that you have, A, you have to label, B, you have to create new patterns of anomalies, right? And then you can train your model, and then you put it in the real world. It will be very confident in when it's an anomaly, when it's not an anomaly, right? So absolutely. Synthetic data approaches like this allows you to, A, if you have some label data, not that anybody has no label data, right? Because you do have some. And then you collect all the data. You can now synthetically learn. You can learn. These models can learn from both these labeled and the entire data set, and you can create labeled data synthetically. Suddenly, instead of manually labeling and waiting for weeks, you have labeled data that is relevant. Number two, now you can go in and say, I have an anomaly pattern A. Can you now give me variants of something that looks like A, but variants of it?
So with that said, I'm sure you would have gotten into an argument with enterprise IT, especially with these kind of operational data sets where you have a privacy and a regulatory boundary. How do you get around that? Or do you not?
Yeah, no, we solve that problem, right? So you're right, because for every enterprise enterprise, the data they have, especially key operational data, as you mentioned, Arvind, is super sensitive. They just they both from a intellectual property and trade secret point of view, and also from regulatory compliance standpoint, both right. So they want, but sometimes they do want to share this data with their partners, vendors, other divisions of a company. Sometimes,
for sure.
Right? So synthetic data becomes an engine to create a privacy safe variant of this, and you can share it internally, externally, and you can be confident. There are the beauty of generating synthetic data like this is that you have metrics, memorization metrics, and distance to closest records. So all these things are actually helping you to make sure that what you generate, it's private enough. And you mentioned the word fidelity earlier. It's fidelity, it's high fidelity, right? It meets my fidelity needs and all that. Now, when we install our product, we can either offer it as a SaaS model where we manage the cloud and somebody accesses that, or we can install it on-prem, right, on their virtual private cloud or on-prem.
Behind their firewalls, you can install it. Yeah.
Right. Correct. So that's what I think to your question, to your point, when you install it inside, nothing leaves, right? All the data resides within the enterprise. The processing is done there, and then the synthetic data generated is there, and then they can then decide what they want to do with the generated data. It's all in their control. So that's the way to go.
No, that's fantastic. See, but I think there's one thought that comes to my mind with respect to fidelity, right? So one of the big challenges we have with regular organizational data is data governance. So the lineage, the privacy, the metadata management, all of those fundamentals that happened 100 years ago, right? BC. Right? So those problems still exist at large scale, right? The only difference now is it's being highlighted by AI saying you don't have good quality data. You don't have good governance on your data. I have no idea where this data is coming from, the lineage, right? So how do you tackle those kind of problems? Especially now I have fake data or synthetic data and real data. How do I know the difference and how can I govern them both?
Yeah. So in a way, so there are two parts to this, right? One is if, enterprises use Databricks or Snowflake, we can actually work within that environment. We are partners to both the Databricks and Snowflake, and they can actually go to the data set that resides in those systems, get them trained through Rockfish, and then generate synthetic data which goes right back into Snowflake, right, into their workflow, and then they can run their analytics or AI workflows through Snowflake or elsewhere, whatever they want to do. So at least the way we are positioned so far, Arvind, is we give you a platform, right? What goes in, you control. What comes out, you control, right? That way you are in 100% control over the data that is used to train the Rockfish model and what is the synthetic data that is generated.
No, makes sense. And I think that the good news there is because you're in the same firewall setting, whether it's Databricks or Snowflake or Fabric or whatever they have, the good news is your lineage is not very complicated. So you can easily identify is this a synthetic or real data, right? And you can always compare and contrast the behavior of AI in one or the other. Now, one problem / question I wanted to ask is cost. See, today, everybody fell for the shiny new toy, and Gartner uses this term called enshittification, right? So you love it, you want to go after it, you bought it, now all of a sudden you're like, oh, right? So that is the phase we are in right now. Many enterprise leaders, they've invested in AI, not understanding the cost. Token optimization, some of these things are consistent discussions that I keep having. How do you, or do you focus on optimizing your synthetic data cost as well? Because I might just fall in love with it and I might create millions and millions and millions and millions of records. There's a cost behind. So how do you put controls there?
Great point, right? Any good tool, LLMs in particular, you never, especially nowadays, people are using it as coding agents, and the cost can just continue to exacerbate, right? So again, we are still a startup, small company. Having said that, at least the model, right? We do need GPUs to run a lot of this stuff. Again, not very high-end GPUs, but mid-level GPU is good enough for the type of stuff that we are doing. Second is Rockfish works as a shadow pipeline. It's not in the line of your regular processing. So you don't need things necessarily done in real time, right? So you have the luxury of, getting data through this. So you don't have to necessarily make real-time outcomes and outputs out of it. So it actually reduces the computational burden, right? Whereas if you go to Claude or in a chat GPT and ask a question, you need instant gratification, right? You need that immediately. We are sort of not in that area. Third is we do two ways of generating synthetic data. One is if you don't have any data, right? All you have is a schema. You say, I need, name,
structure, metadata.
Structure, right? Any metadata. If you give just a schema, and then if you have any business rules or business constraints or anything of that nature, you can say, hey, the income is only between X and Y, or, age of this person is between X and Y, and so on, right? So any constraints that you have, we can incorporate that, and then it can generate data from scratch, right? And you can generate as much quantity as you want. The computation required for that is very minimal because the system, you're not really learning from existing data, but instead using some knowledge that you have incorporated to generate it. So that's approach one. Approach two, you have vast quantities quantities of data, right, that you've collected, let's say telemetry data that you want to train. That goes into Rockfish, and Rockfish learns the patterns and all that.
Yeah.
And then that model is used to generate synthetic data from there. In which case, you do need train, and we use generative models. As you know, our technology came out of research at Carnegie Mellon University. Right? Two of my co-founders, Gas and Julia, are faculty there. So a lot of the work they started with was using generative adversarial networks, GANs, to do this at a scale, at high performance, and so on. Then over time, we also realized that transformers come into play in certain cases. And then in the newer models, like state space models, like Mamba, that originated actually at CDO as well. They all could play a different role. So we have built a multi-model, right? So we're not attached to one model, but we can use what is relevant for that data, that requirement, and all that, right?
And bring your own model as well, Girish?
So we have refined a lot of the stuff. So we have actually taken GANs, for example, and purpose built it for this. Same thing with transformers, Arvind.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
So because of that, you can actually do a lot of high cardinality data sets, large volume, and all that pretty well. And we also have some patterns around how to make these things scalable, right? When you have various large numbers, large time duration, epochs, and all that, how do you kind of make it work better and so on? So the net, I think, going back to your question, it uses a fixed GPU. If let's say you're deploying it on-prem, you have a particular GPU that you have. That's all it uses. It is not going to go in and eat anymore. So you already know what the cost of the infrastructure that you're going to spend on this. That's going to be your cost primarily.
Predictable cost. You put your controls inside, your guardrails inside, so that it doesn't exceed the cost. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. So that allows enterprises to use you guys as appropriate with a predictable cost, as you said, right? So this is fascinating. So I do have to ask you this question, because obviously this seems to be a big question everybody asks me when I talk to them. Look, 10 years ago, I think, I don't remember who said this, software eats the world is what somebody said, or maybe 15 years ago, right? 5 years ago, somebody said AI will eat the world. Today, everybody are saying SaaS is going to be dead. Because every, Claude release, Claude Code, Claude Coworker, Claude this, Claude that, and then GPT has its own things. In your type of business, in my opinion, it's very hard to replicate, because you're not just a SaaS engine, you're more of a data company. So your value prop is the data itself. It's not just the software, if you will. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Arvind, I think it's a $1.6 trillion question, right? We just saw last week. Saw an article that 1.6 trillion in software market cap went down. No, it's up for debate. But again, the way I think about it is the following: software has done us a lot of good, right, over the years. I mean, the world functions because of software, etc. AI has come to accelerate it, right? There are elements of the software that AI now can do a lot more effective. For example, even us, we used to create workflows and notebooks in the past. Again, around BC time, right? Now we can.
I didn't know that we only created BC. I thought even AD, we still create workflows. Oh man,
we still do manually, right? But today, I can actually, we use Claude, for example, or you can use your favorite NLM. We can specify the intent, and it actually goes and reads the APIs and our documentation and all that, and then it creates a workflow for you, a nice JSON file, right? That's not replacing software. That is actually making the software work faster, better, and make us a lot better, right, in terms of what we do. So I feel that there are areas that we never thought these things can help us or accelerate or transform. They're doing it. That doesn't mean that your entire software infrastructure is going away, right? Because if you just let only this mechanics of this work without the real software that actually controls the data, and to your point, eventually a system works because of a software, a model, or a process and data, right? You need all three. Now, data is even the need for data is even more today than it ever was. The process, I think, is getting completely transformed thanks to these things. But the basic software, what it is, authentication, how to do this remains. And to what you said, there are going to be new opportunities, right? Because all of a sudden, if you let you're a world expert on agents, right? AI agents. If you just let them loose, we don't know where we'll be, right? So you need.
I'm seeing that every day. You're spot on.
Exactly.
I will tell you this, Girish. Every day I'm learning so many scary things that these agents can do with execution, right? Especially with large clients. I envision a world where 5 years from now, maybe I will have my agent do this podcast on my behalf, and it'll talk as eloquent as me, and then you'll have your agent come to my show. Now we have an agent-to-agent conversation, and then another agent to go edit my video. 2 hours later, I have Girish's video on my YouTube channel. That's the way. What's that?
That's amazing, right? Yeah.
That's the way I envision it happening. All right, awesome. Well, look, as a closing question, I did want to ask you this. If looking ahead, if you have a message for all the C-suites and the leadership that is shaping the path for us in the future, what fundamental shift would somebody like a synthetic data company create? And what do you see as a champion creating that shift, right? You said the ADBC or BCAD. Do you see a AS after synthetic data?
Yeah, no, Arvind, I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball. But again, my thing is the following, right? Enterprise leaders, they have, they have two, three problems, right? One is they want to continue to build their products well and make their offering better. Number two, they want to stay competitive, right? And number three, they want to adopt any technology that will help them do A and B, right, out of this. So, again, my message to them is look at your, continue to look at your strategy and business plan and see where, AI can help. And then within that, see what data that you need to augment, make it all work really well for you.
Yep.
The tools are available today, right? All you need to connect these dots. Then the platforms like ours and others can, fill in those gaps for you very quickly. It's doable today. It's not difficult at all. But I think knowing that this is what I want to get to, this is a problem that I need to do. I think realizing that, and it's like Everest, right? I mean, before the first person climbed the Everest, people thought it was impossible. After the first person climbed, now look at it. It's like a stampede every year, right?
Oh yeah.
Because everyone knows it's doable. It's no longer a question, right? I think same way, that's the message that I would love to pass on to enterprise leaders is a lot of these things are doable. You just need to know you want to do it.
One small step for a man, one big step for an enterprise is what Mr. Girish says today. All right. Very good. Very good. Girish, I absolutely enjoyed this conversation. It is very, very clear that, synthetic data, which I used 2 years ago to create just for my own testing agents, has now become from a niche concept to more of a strategic imperative. Analysts and markets are already calling this a watershed moment in data strategy. So I wish you well. You guys are doing a fascinating job, and I wish I can see a lot more of Rockfish everywhere. So good luck to you and your team, and thank you for coming on my show.
Again, thank you so much. It's such a privilege. Awesome talking to you, and you keep rocking. You're doing amazing stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish.